Hello, Dawn here. It's things straightened out. Today's topic is on Esther. Esther made a very important impact on the Jews. So we're gonna talk about Esther, but it's gonna be in two parts. First part is an introduction of how Esther became queen. And then the second part will be what Esther does as the queen. So it will be two parts in this one. So we'll have some questions too in between. So if you need to get some coffee, take some notes if you want. And let's learn about Esther. So today is October 23rd. And it's about 10 o'clock in the morning. So I'm going to have you just sit and listen. And then come up with some questions about Esther. And think about what she has done before the queen and who she was. Okay? Let's get started. So we're starting at Esther number 1. At this time, it was the 3rd year of the reign of King Ahasuerus. He was the emperor of vast media of Persia, with its 127 provinces stretching from India to Ethiopia. This was the year of the great celebration of Shushan Palace, to which the emperor invited all of his governors, aides, and army officers, bringing them in from every part of the media of Persia for an occasion. This was a celebration that lasted 6 months, a tremendous display of the wealth and glory of his empire. So they were having a 6-month celebration of his empire. When it was all over, the king gave a special party for the palace servants and officials, janitors and cabinet officials alike, for 7 days. So it didn't just go for 6 months. He put on for another special party for all the servants and ones that worked for 7 days. So it was kind of interesting. He must have liked parties. The revelry held in the courtyard of the palace garden. So he put it in the garden to have the parties for the servants. The decorations were green, white, and blue, fastened with purple ribbons tied to silver rings embedded in the marble pillars. Gold and silver benches stood on the pavement of black, red, white, and yellow marble. That must have been very pretty. Drinks were served in those golden goblets of many designs, and there was an abundance of royal wine, for the king was feeling very generous. So he was really generous, even to his servants. The only restriction on the drinking was that no one should be compelled to take more than he wanted. So you could stop whenever you wanted. But those who wished could have as much as they pleased. Ooh, that could be awful. For the king had instructed his officers to let everyone decide this matter for themselves, so they were free to do with how much drinking they wanted to do. Queen Vashti gave a party for the women of the palace at the same time. On the final day, when the king was feeling high, half drunk from wine, he told the 7 eunuchs who were his personal aides, Mehuman, Beztha, Harbana, Bigtha, Abitha, Zethar, and Carcass. I hope I said that right. To bring Queen Vashti to him with the royal crown upon her head, so that all the men could gaze upon her beauty, for she was a very beautiful woman. But when they conveyed the emperor's orders to the queen, she refused to come. The king was so furious. But first consulted his lawyer, for he did nothing without their advice, which is a good idea. They were men of wisdom who knew the temper of the times as well as Persian law and justice, and the king trusted their judgment. These men were Karshena, Sethra, Admatha, Tarish, Mears, Marshin, and Memucan, 7 high officers of Media Persia. They were his personal friends as well as being the chief officers of the government. So, he was very angry, so he consulted his the justice to find out what he could do. What shall we do about this situation, he asked them. What penalty does the law provide for a queen who refuses to obey the king's orders properly sent through his aides? Well, Memucan answered for the others, the queen has wronged not only the king, but every official and citizen of your empire. So she really did something wrong. She disobeyed not only the king, the officials, but also the citizens. For the women everywhere will begin to disobey their husbands when they learn what the queen had done. And before this day is out, the wife of everyone in the officials throughout your empire will hear about what the queen had done and will start talking to us husbands the same way. So that's what they were afraid of. They thought, if she's going to start doing this, talking back to her husband, all the other wives in the palace were going to do the same thing. They're going to disobey, and they're not going to do what their husbands or the aides tell them to do. And there will be contempt and anger throughout the realm. We suggest that the subject to your agreement, you issue a royal edict, a law that can law them that they do can what they want to do is they want to change that law. That the king to be banished from the presence, and that you choose another queen more worthy than she. So he wanted to banish the women, or the queen, and get another queen that will serve his purpose and listen to and follow the laws. When this decree is published throughout your great kingdom, husbands everywhere, whatever their rank, will be respected by their wives. The kings and all his aides through this made good sense, so he followed the counsel and sent letters to all his provinces in the local language, stressing that every man should rule his home and then should assert his authority. So he wanted to make sure that all the men ruled over their homes and become the authority. But after the king Susrus anger had cooled, so he finally cooled down. He began brooding over his loss of the queen, realizing that he would never see her again because she was banned. So his aides suggested, let us go find a most beautiful girl in the empire and bring them to the king for his pleasure. So he was going to look for another queen. We will appoint agents in each province to select a young, lovely for the royal harem. Haggai, the eunuch in charge, will see what they are given, making sure that they receive all kinds of beauty treatments. After that, the girl who pleases you most shall be your queen. So they're going to go and wander around and find a new queen. This suggestion naturally pleased the queen very much, and he put the plan into immediate effect because he wanted his queen. Yeah. But he wanted a beautiful queen. Now there was a certain Jew in the palace named Mordecai, son of Jared, son of Semi, son of Kish, a Benjamite. That's what kind of what he was. He was a Jew, but he was also a Benjamite. He had been captured from Jerusalem when Jerusalem was destroyed by King Nebuchadnezzar, and had been exiled to Babylon along with the king of Judah and many others, because they had captured a lot of the different kings too at that time when they were at war. This man had a beautiful and lovely young cousin, Hadashah, also called Ezra. Or not Ezra, but Esther. Sorry. I'm thinking about my cat, Ezra. But that was her name. Keep that in mind. So what was her name? What was her real name? Hadashah, who was also called Esther. She was a lovely young cousin to this person, whose father and mother were dead, and whom he had adopted into his family and raised as his own daughter. So her cousin had adopted her and brought her into his family. Because her mom and dad were killed. Or they were dead. Anyways. So now, as a result of the king's decree, Esther was brought to the king's harem at the palace along with many other young girls. Haggai, who was responsible for the harem, was very much impressed with her and did his very best to make her happy. He ordered special menu for her, favored her for beauty treatments, gave her 7 girls from the palace as her maids, and gave her the most luxurious apartment in the harem. So he went out beyond treatments and give her the very best, because he really liked her, didn't he? And he thought maybe the king would like her too. Esther hadn't told anyone that she was a Jew, for Mordecai had said not to. So Mordecai didn't want the king to know that she was a Jew. So that's when they decided to change her name over to Esther, so that he wouldn't know that she was a Jewish girl. Esther hadn't told anyone that she was a Jew, for Mordecai had said not to. He came daily to the court of the harem to ask about Esther and to find out what was happening to her. The instructions concerning these girls were that before being taken to the king's bed, each would be given 6 months of beauty treatment with oils and myrrh, followed by 6 months with special perfume and ointments. Then each girl's turn came with spending the night with the king, and she was given her choice of clothing or jewelry she wished to enhance her beauty. She was taken to the king's apartment in the evening, and the next morning returned to the second harem where the king's wives lived. So they were brought to the apartment, and then they had to go back to their place where the harem was taken, where the king's wives lived. There she was under the care of another king and lived there for the rest of her life, never seeing the king again unless he especially enjoyed her and called her by name. So they would leave and they would never go back to the king's palace unless she was called by name specifically. When it was Esther's turn to go to the king, she accepted the advice of Haggai, the eunuch in charge of the harem, dressing according to his instructions, and all the other girls exclaimed with delight when they saw her, because she was probably really beautiful. So Esther was taken to the palace of the king in January of the 7th year of his reign. Well, the king loved Esther more than any of the other girls. He was also delighted with her that he set the royal crown on her head and declared her queen instead of his old queen, because he really liked her more. So he loved Esther more than any other girls. So he delighted her that he set the royal crown on her head And then they celebrated the occasion, and he threw another big party for all of his officials and servants, giving generous gifts to everyone and making grants to the province in the form of remission of taxes. Later the king demanded a second bevy of beautiful girls. By that time Mordecai had become a government official. Esther had still never told the government officials who she was. Esther still hadn't told anybody that she was a Jewish, for she was still following Mordecai's orders, just as she had in his home. So she always followed the rules of what Mordecai said. Yeah. And then one day, Mordecai was on duty at the palace. Two of the king's eunuchs, Bigzan and Teresh, who were guards at the palace gate, became angry at the king and plotted to assassinate him. Mordecai heard about it and passed on the information to Queen Esther, who told the king, crediting Mordecai with the information. An investigation was made, and the two men were found guilty and impaled alive. This was all duly recorded in the book of history of the king Ahasuerus' reign as part of the king's reign. So then, soon after King Ahasuerus appointed Haman as prime minister, he was the most powerful official in the empire next to the king himself. Now all the king's officials bowed before him in deep reverence whenever he passed by, for the king had commanded, but Mordecai refused to bow. "Why are you disobeying the king's commandment?" the others demanded day after day, but he still refused. Finally, they spoke to Haman about it to see whether Mordecai could get away with it because of his being a Jew, which was the excuse he had given them. So he told him he was a Jew and he wasn't going to bow down. And that was the excuse. He says, "No, I'm a Jew. I don't bow down to him." Haman was furious, but decided not to lay hand on Mordecai alone, but to move against all of Mordecai's people, the Jew, and he wanted to destroy all of them throughout the whole kingdom of Ahasuerus. The most propitious time for this action was determined by throwing dice. To make that decision, they threw dice. Wow. This was done in April of the 12th year of the reign of Ahasuerus, and February of the following year was the date indicated. Haman now approached the king about the matter. There was a certain race of people scattered through all the province of your kingdom, he began, and their laws are different from those of the other nations, and they refuse to obey the king's laws. Therefore, it is not in the king's interest to let them live. If it pleases the king, issue a decree that they be destroyed, and I will pay 20 million into the royal treasure for the expenses involved in the purge. It's 20 million into the purge. The king agreed, confirming this decision by removing his ring from his finger and giving it to Haman, telling him, "Keep the money, but go ahead and do with it like with the people, whatever you think is best." So he didn't take the money. He took the king's ring instead. 2 or 3 weeks later, Haman called in the king's secretaries and dictated letters to the governor and officials throughout the empire, to each province of its own languages and dialected. These letters were signed in the name of King Ahasuerus and sealed with the king, or with the ring, which is the king's ring. They were then sent by messengers into the province of the empire, decreeing that the Jews, young and old, women and children, must be killed on the 28th of February of the following year, and their property given to those who killed them. So they had to be killed on the 28th, all Jews. But then, whatever they owned, whether it be housing, money, probably their cattle, whatever they owned, was to go to those who had killed them. A copy of this etiquette, the letter stated, must be proclaimed as law in every province and made known to all your people, so that they will be ready to do their duty in the appointed day. The edict went out to the king's speediest couriers the city had. Then the king and Haman sat down for a drinking spree as the city fell into confusion and panic. So, here they're letting all these people know that this is what's going to happen on February 28th. And so everybody was in a panic because all the Jews were to be killed. When Mordecai learned what had been done, he tore his clothes and put on sackcloth and ashes and went out into the city crying with a loud and bitter wail. He stood outside the gate of the palace for one more. No one was permitted to enter the mourning cloth. And throughout all the province there was great mourning among the Jews, fasting, weeping, and despair at the king's decree. And many lay in sackcloth and ashes. When Esther's maid and eunuch came and told her about Mordecai, she was deeply distressed and sent clothing to him to replace the sackcloth, but he refused. He didn't want to. He wanted to be like the rest of the Jews, being in sackcloth. He didn't want to be in good, nice clothes, so he refused. Then Esther sent for Heth, one of the king's eunuchs who had been appointed as her attendant, and told him to go out to Mordecai and find out what the trouble was and why he was acting like that. Hathach went out to the city square and found Mordecai just outside the palace gates and heard the whole story from him and about the money Haman had promised to pay in the king's treasure for the destruction of the Jews. So he told them about it. Mordecai gave Hathach a copy of the king's decree, dooming all Jews, and told him to show it to Esther and tell her what was happening, and that she could go to the king to plead for her people. So Hathach returned to Esther with Mordecai's message. Esther told Hathach to go back and say to Mordecai, "All the world knows that anyone, whether man or woman, goes into the king's inner court without his summons is doomed to die, unless the king holds his golden scepter, and the king has not called for me to come to him in more than a month." So Hathach gave Esther's message to Mordecai. This was Mordecai's reply to Esther. "Do you think you will escape there in the palace when all the other Jews are killed? If you keep quiet at the time like this, God will deliver the Jews from some other source, but you and your relatives will die. What's more, you can say, but that God has brought you into the palace for just such a time as this." Then Esther said to tell Mordecai, "Go and gather together all the Jews of Shushan and fast for me. Do not eat or drink for 3 days, nights or day. And I and my maids will do the same." And then thought, "It is strictly forbidden." Must have been forbidden. "I will go in to see the king, and if I perish, I perish." So Mordecai did as Esther told him. We're going to stop right there. So the main thing right there is, with Esther, she's not to seek out the king. Anybody who seeks out the king without being called will die. But she's willing to die to go talk to the king. She says, "If I perish, I perish." But she's willing to, we're going to stop right there, because the next half is going to be when Esther starts helping her people. She's not concerned about her life. She's more interested in saving her people at this time. So she says, "If I perish, I perish," but she's going to go talk to the king. So that will be the second part. Until our second part, have a great day. God bless you.